Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Oasis Church International and Oasis Community Development Centers mental health podcast on this evening. We will be covering domestic violence and mental health. I'm so excited to bring this topic to the community because we know there are so many individuals that deal with domestic violence day in and day out. So we welcome you on this evening. We welcome you to Oasis Church International. Our senior pastor is none other than Cassandra V. Fullwood. She's the senior pastor of Oasis as well as Oasis Community Development Center. I am the mental health coordinator, and I also am the vice president of NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Illness. Most of you all may have seen me before doing either podcasts or the mental health forums, or even being in the community, actually educating and bringing awareness to the community regarding mental health on so many different topics. So we have some very important guests on this evening. We have none other than Dr. Avis Chapman-Reese, who will be joining us on this evening. And Dr. Avis has a lot to share with us as she has been a victim of domestic violence. And I cannot wait to hear Dr. Avis. We also have what I call a domestic violence expert, Dr. J.R. Thicklin, who has his organization on domestic violence. He's going to be in with us shortly as well. But right now, I don't want to belabor the point. I want to go ahead and bring Dr. Avis Chapman-Reese in the room. Good evening, Dr. Avis.
Hello, how are you?
I'm good. How about you?
Wonderful, wonderful.
Thank you so much for joining, Dr. Avis. I know it's been a long time coming, and Avis has actually done one of the mental health moments for us in the past, and she's talked about domestic violence. Mental health moments is something that Oasis Church International and Oasis Community Development Center does on a monthly basis. And it's usually like a 5-minute, just like an educational 5-minute talk, pep talk, or just informational. And we have different people from the community to talk about the different mental health topics. So thank you, Avis, for what you've already done. And I so appreciate you being here, and I'm honored to have you here. So let's go ahead and get started. I would like for you to please tell the audience a little bit about Dr. Avis. So it's like your mini bio.
Okay. Born and raised in West Palm Beach, Florida, Riviera Beach. I attended North Shore High School. However, we matriculated to Palm Beach Lakes Community High School. I'm a part of the very first class from Palm Beach Lakes. I attended Florida Memorial College, now University, where I earned a Bachelor of Science degree in Business Administration. I furthered my education at Nova Southeastern University, where I earned my master's degree in educational specialist degree in curriculum instruction, and a doctorate degree in educational and organizational leadership. This is my 25th year in education. I have served in various capacities in public school education as well as on a collegiate level. I currently teach on a collegiate level at Hampton University. I teach in a PhD program in the College of Education, Central State University, University of Mid-Florida, teaching in the MBA program. I also serve as campus president at Palm Beach Academy, and my most recent accomplishment, provost. That's a big thing to me. So that I'm busy.
Yes, you are. Oh my goodness. Dr. Avis, I did not know that you had all of that under your belt, but I have to say, you are a phenomenal woman.
Thank
And we are really going to find out just how phenomenal she is because she's going through a lot. She doesn't look like what she's been through, and many people will be surprised. So I am so proud of you, Avis.
you. Thank
Oh
you.
my goodness. Yes, I saw the information about the office of the provost. Congratulations.
Thank
Avis
you.
happens to be the she also is a sorority sister of mine with Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. She's with our West Palm Beach alumni chapter, and she is the vice president. She's the second vice president of our chapter. So you
Yeah,
have accomplished so much, Avis, and I'm so proud of you
thank
again.
you.
So, when did you start speaking about domestic violence?
Oh, good question. I became very vocal, I would say, within the last vocal in the sense of speaking publicly in front of an audience within the last 8 years, I would say. I thought that, let me go back. When I was in that moment, I promised God that if He got me out, that I would talk about it. I would help people. And I would sporadically do that, right? And we'll talk about that a little later. But I thought me speaking to individuals every now and then was me fulfilling my promise or my purpose, and that's not what He wanted me to do. And so the reason why I kind of kept quiet, I didn't want to be judged. I didn't want to go through the questions. Why did you stay? Why did you do this? Why didn't you do that? So, and then also in the sense of protecting the person. But then I had a friend of mine, very good friend of mine. She told me, Avis, but this is your story and you have to tell it. And you don't know how many people you can impact just by sharing your story, because like you said, I don't look like what I've been through, and so it came a point where I had to not only believe in myself but believe that I can get out, and I would have to not sit on this, because domestic violence has no respect of person, no
That's right.
respect of age, no respect of color, no respect of socioeconomic status.
Mhm.
So I would say within the last 8 years, I became more vocal.
Okay. You know what? No matter how long it's been, I'm so proud of you that you decided to be vocal about it. And you're absolutely right. You want to speak out because whatever you go through is for someone else. And I so understand what you're saying about trying to protect, the violator. And that's what we do a lot, especially as women, and I can't speak for a man, but I know us as women try to do that. So what would you say is I know you mentioned about, your purpose and wanting to help someone else. I want to ask you, you mentioned that you wanted to protect the violator.
Yes.
So was it more like to protect him so nobody knew what he did? Because this is so important. And I hope there's many people listening. Let me say something right quick.
Okay.
If you are listening, please, please, whether you're on Facebook, whether you're on YouTube, whether you're on our website, oasischurchintl.org, we want you, or oasiscommunitydc.org, we want you to share this with someone. Share it with them so they can get on and they can hear what we're talking about. So anyway, you mentioned you were trying to protect him, correct?
Correct.
And was it to protect his image, or would you say it was more out of fear? Just out of curiosity, was it out of fear? Like you probably thought that he would come back and, do some harm to you. So what would you say it was?
It was definitely protecting his image. Fear? No, not at all, because I'm not I'm not that person anymore.
Right.
I'm not that 18-year-old anymore. So it wasn't out of fear. Again, it was just to protect in a sense. And I didn't realize that that's what I was doing. Because we still know a lot of the same people. It was very popular, and it wasn't, I didn't want it to be perceived as my speaking out being done in a malicious manner, because it was not. But this is my story, and I make no apologies for that, because I didn't ask for that to happen to me. So this is a part of, and I had to accept the fact that this is a part of my purpose. So once I had that pep talk from my big sister of 3 days, and she knows
Mhm.
what I'm talking about, she said, "This is your story. It got nothing to do with him. This is your story." And so, and it also helps when you have the support. You have a support system. So, to answer your question, it was more protecting the image.
Okay, okay. And I'm sure that happens so much.
Mhm.
And that's why I really wanted to, find out exactly your why, because I think it can go both ways. So
Absolutely.
did you ever find that you were afraid of speaking out when you were just getting out of it?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
I was definitely afraid to speak out at that time of my life. Again, because I was one of the ones who would, before this happened to me, that I would say, "Oh my God, I would never let someone hit me. I would not do this. I would not do that." But now, have gone through that, I can say, never say what you'll never do
That's right.
until you are in that moment, until you're in that space. So in that aspect, it was just it that was just an ordeal. I don't know how graphic I could go. Um, but I really believe that, again, a lot of times when you try to protect people, people think that domestic violence can't reach them.
Mm-hmm.
You have prominent judges and lawyers and doctors and people who look great on the outside. One thing that I can honestly say that we as a people do, we mask, we hide behind different things very well.
Yes,
Until you get behind closed doors, that's when the real happenings start happening. Um,
exactly.
so, um, yeah, I don't know how graphic you want me to go, but I
So, so
serious.
actually, you know what? I want you to go as graphic as you feel comfortable
Okay.
in going. So, I want to ask you, and did we talk about where you were when you started dealing with domestic violence? If you would just tell myself and the audience, where were you, how old you were, and then yes, you can begin your story.
So, before I always speak about domestic violence, I always start with statistics. And statistically speaking, um, domestic violence victims go back to their abusers at least 7 times before
Wow.
they get out, if they get out. Where I was away at college. I was 17, going on 18. And so for me, I do not have an older sibling. So, it was just me. My all of my siblings were younger than I was. So I didn't know what the red flags were. Um, that was like my first real boyfriend, if you will. And so it started out with the compliments and with the whining and dining, and I just had a ball, right? And so I started getting these comments, "If you leave me, I kill you." But it was joking.
Mm,
Little did I know, you serious, right?
right.
And so my love for him at that time, just, I don't know. I would have had 2 children by this point.
Mm,
Those children would have been 33 and 34 years of age, 32 and 33 years of age. One was aborted, I miscarried. And so I was just so hell bent, and anybody that really, really knows me knows that I come from somewhat of a prominent family. Miss
Mm-hmm.
Lisa.
Yes.
And the expectation was for me to finish school. That's what I went for school. Now I was a Fort Valley conceived baby, and so I'm sure that my mom did not want me to repeat her cycle
Yes.
because she was a teen mom as well.
Mhm.
So I started hearing, getting these little red flags, but I didn't take heed to that. And then it was telling me how to dress. This is too short. This is too tight. Wear your hair this way, wear your hair that way. Then it went into who I can speak to, who can't speak to me. What are you talking about? Why are you speaking to him? What, how do you know him? How do it got into that point. And so the very first time that I was hit was when I was out having fun with my friends. Back at that time, I went to a HBCU. The
Yes.
boys did panty raids, right? So they were running through the dorms, just going inside of the girls' rooms, trying to see if the door wasn't locked. They went in, got all your underwear out, put them in.
Wow.
Just it was so mischievous. Okay, so we decided, me and my girlfriends decided we were gonna flip the script and we were gonna do the same thing. Having fun, right? And so I was chastised for that and I was slapped.
Oh.
And it startled me because I'm like, and then that moment, I was wrong. I shouldn't have made him mad. And so also I always preface me speaking saying that domestic violence doesn't necessarily have to be physical, but it is verbal, it is mental, it is sexual, it is financial, it's emotional, it's all of those things. And so after I was slapped 10 minutes later, we're intimate. So
Wow.
that slap went to I've been pushed down a flight of steps. I've been kicked out of a moving truck. Ribs cracked,
Ooh.
and so I stopped coming home like I used to because my mama, my grandparent, especially my granddaddy, can pick up on things.
Yes.
So I had to stay away, right? And I endured some stuff, and so my love for him turned into fear of him.
Mhm.
I've lost friends behind that, because they were trying to tell me this is happening, that is happening, and I didn't want to believe that. And so every time, over the years, I endured this for probably 3 years. My grades started failing. My GPA started failing. I was on academic one and academic probation, academic suspension. All of those things, played a part in that. And so I'm just afraid. I'm afraid to talk about it. I'm afraid to say something to my family. And when it did get to the point that I would speak to my family about it, they would intervene. But then guess what? I go back.
Right.
So a lot of women go through that.
Mhm.
And I see a lot of women that just settle and say, hey, I don't have anywhere else to go. So I'm just going to stay here and
Right.
I'll just put up with this. Right. So again, I'm 18 years old. I
Mhm.
don't know how to process this. I don't know how to deal with that. And so it does play on your psyche. It does, affect your self-esteem because I was thinking, what am I doing? What am I saying that causes him to be angry? But
Mhm.
little did I know, kids model what they see at home.
Right.
And so I was privy to him being privy to this behavior at
Mhm.
home. So I
Mhm.
guess for little boys, when they see this happening in their home, they grow up and they think that this is okay for me to put my hands on a woman. And the same thing with young ladies, young girls, when they grow up in the home and they see this, hey, it's okay for a man to hit me because that means that they care.
Right. Right. Right.
So I hope I answered your question so far.
Oh my goodness, you really did, Avis. I'm so glad you said so much that stuck out. There was a lot of nuggets there, and the main thing is you saw the warning signs, but you ignored it. And I hear that so much because we don't want to believe, that this is that person or begin to make excuses. Something else that you said was um how I guess you trying to protect him and looking at his status, and all of that, and then also thinking about your family status. And you're absolutely right. Avis comes from a family that was very known, in the community, and grandfather, grandmother that did hair like, oh my goodness, she was like the best cosmetologist around. So and then your mom, but I like what you said, that domestic violence does not have to only be physical. It
Yes,
is mental, it is verbal, it is sexual, it is financial, it's emotional. Avis, did you have to deal with more than just physical domestic violence?
absolutely, absolutely. All of those things, those little um, pieces. Yes,
Yes.
yes, I
Okay.
did. The
Okay.
mental, and this is another thing. A lot of people don't understand that even years later, when you
Yes.
get out, you have
Yes.
triggers.
Hmm.
You have triggers, and so it was to the point where I felt like I had PTSD. Right,
Right.
so I had different smells, different songs, even how the enemy tries to play on you every time that I um, tried to get my nonprofit together.
Hmm.
Comes back and reminds me, you don't need to do that. Just different
Wow.
things. I tried to take my life 3 times.
Right.
3 times,
Right.
right?
Wow. Wow.
And so again, here I am again. People that really know me, they know I like to take pictures. I love to take selfies. I love to be in the moment having fun. But do they really understand? I'm not supposed to be here.
Right. Right.
I'm not. I'm really not.
That's
You know what I
good.
mean? And
Yes.
so I've heard stories of why she got to take all these pictures because I'm not supposed to be here.
Right. Right.
It got to the point where I was, like really questioning my purpose. And I always found myself coming right back to this spot. I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to talk
Hmm.
to people. I don't want, but this was part of my purpose. And so now every time I talk about it, I get stronger. I get stronger because again, I was okay with talking to people here and there, but that's
Yes.
not where the impact is. The
That's right.
impact is doing what we're doing now. So, you know, no, I don't. I don't. It's too many people that feel like, well, I'm just going to be a product of my environment.
Right.
Just going to
Right.
get into the things that I have gone through. Not me. Not
That's
me.
right. That's right.
So it does play a big part in your on your psyche. It
Yes.
really, really does.
Absolutely. Yes, I really I can imagine. And I've gone through some domestic violence as well. Um but I think because of what I've seen, and some people say it's in your blood, I got some Bahamian blood in me. I'm not sure what it is, but I got a little fighter in me, so and I wasn't like that at first until I went through in my first marriage at 17 years old, and I felt like, I have to defend myself.
Yeah.
So I kind of found myself being that person that was aggressive. And not just that, my story. I went through, a lot of trauma as a child. So I found myself, being the same way. So it wasn't like the man, it was the woman. However, it was him initiating it. Like, I've been choked, and the first time I was thrown down, that was from my first husband. He threw me on the ground, and oh my goodness, that was it. And then whenever a man would call me out my name or whatever, immediately, I want to lash out.
The trigger.
And I like what you said, triggers. There things trigger you. And I think people need to understand, there are triggers, and there is something that you can do about it. And that's going to move me into the next question, Avis. Did you ever seek therapy?
Yes and no. I started therapy years ago. I believe it was probably a year or two after I graduated, but I stopped because I was like,
Mhm.
but I'm over it. I'm done.
Right,
You know what I
right.
mean?
Mhm.
But with much prayer and consecration,
Yes,
um, I can honestly say that I have endured um a lot, and I've dealt with a lot, and a lot of things that I do is therapeutic.
yes.
And again, two things: I am operating now under obedience. I have to, and transparency.
Yes,
Because
yes.
again, too many women we hide behind. It's a lot of people hide behind makeup. They hide behind social media. They hide
Yes,
behind, comedy and things like that. And just be real. You know what I
yes.
mean? Because sometimes people just, carry themselves like they got it all together, and you don't. Just
That's
be
right.
real, because you
That's
don't
right.
realize who you can help. And
Right.
so once I start operating under those two things, obedience and transparency, I'm at a totally different area in my life where I just cannot be bothered, and I'm not,
Right.
because
Right.
people pleaser, trying to please, everyone, wondering what someone would think or how they feel, and dealing, with that, but and just not dealing with myself and
Right.
loving
Right.
myself, because it got to the point where I wasn't loving myself. My
Mhm.
self-esteem was like just in the trash.
Right. That's real good. That's so, so good, Avis. That's a very good point. And that was something I was going to ask you in terms of self-esteem. And we actually have a question in the chat.
Okay.
Before I ask you this question, let's answer the question in the chat. It says, how did you deal with the PTSD aspect? Were you avoidant towards it, or did you learn to cope with it?
So how did I deal with the PTSD aspect of it? A lot of that relief for me came through counseling.
Hmm.
And the biggest battles we face is in our mind also.
Yes.
Um, Also, relationships that I've had after that, I had to come to the realization that I cannot bring the baggage, the old baggage, into, a new relationship.
Right.
So I've learned to cope with that. My husband, that's my best friend. Oh my God.
Right.
You know what
Right.
I mean?
Right.
And so he's helped me through so much. And it's so important for a woman and for a man, just for, if you're in a relationship, it's important to be or to feel safe with that person,
Right.
if that
Right.
makes sense.
It
Um,
does make sense. So let me ask you this, Avis. And before I ask you this question, there's a couple questions I want to ask. I do want to applaud you for chasing your purpose. And thank God, you say you're obedient now. So, thank God that you're, listening to his voice and walking in obedience. I do want to say that it's never God's purpose for us to go through
no,
domestic violence or any type of traumatic experience. But what he does is take all of that and turn it around for your good.
absolutely.
Like the Bible talks about, in all things work together for the good of them that love the Lord and called according to his purpose. So, Avis, I just want to point that out. I'm so proud of you again for walking in your purpose and understand that, you know what, you made a comment that I'm not the little girl anymore.
Mm-mm.
And that is so important because I think that's where we get stuck. Like me with the mental illness, I was stuck in little girl Lisa, and
So was
Avis like,
I. I'm glad you said that, Lisa,
yeah,
because I was stuck in I was stuck in the realization that I had daddy issues.
yes, absolutely,
So for my failed
absolutely,
relationships, I had to sit up in my bed and verbalize, you know what, Avis? The reason why you have these failed relationships, because I was the one that just give all the time. But the people that I were in relationships with, they took from me all the time. And I'm like, okay, what's going on? And so people don't understand all of these different things play on each other, right? So at
right.
that time, again, I remember I said that my mom was a teen mom, so was my dad. He was a teen dad, right? They didn't
Mm-hmm.
go there. They didn't go there to have a child and get
Right,
married, right?
right.
And so every failed relationship, not saying I had a whole bunch of them, but the long-term relationships that I had, I had an epiphany that
Mm-hmm.
all of them, those men had certain traits that my biological father had. And
Yes,
until I had to sit down at the age of 47,
yes.
because see, it wasn't time for me to have the conversation with my dad that I wanted to in Avis
Mm-hmm.
in the 20s, Avis in the 30s. It wasn't
Mm-hmm.
time. And so, God strategically does things intentionally. And so
Yes,
when it was that time for me to talk to him, he understood me. I understood him, because if my daddy was in my life, now I had my bonus dad in my life, but I was so scared to talk to him because,
yes.
somebody touching his child, somebody gonna go to jail. You know
Right,
what I mean?
right.
So once I got my daddy issue together, and so when I started praying specifically to God or what I need, what I want, and
Yeah,
just yielding to Him as far as, you know what, I'm waiting on my husband, the one that
that's
you
right.
sent me.
That's right.
He here right now. And
That's
now
right.
I have the best relationship with my father. But I did,
Yes,
in my conversation with him, told him that I resented him back when I was going through that because he wasn't there
yes,
to
yes.
tell me
That's so good.
about the
Yes,
men, the red flags, what to stay away from, and things like that, right? So all of
yes,
these things play on each other.
yes. That's awesome. I want to ask the person in the chat that asked that question. Did Dr. Avis answer your questions? Just type in the chat. If you have any further
Okay.
questions, feel free to ask. I'm dealing with trust. How do you deal with it? Someone said now because of
So and I had trust issues too. I really
mhm,
did. But I had to work on myself. I
yes,
had to get my self-esteem back to where and align myself with what God says, who I am. And
yes,
because if we don't love ourselves, then we can't place expectations on somebody else to love us. You
right.
feel me?
Yeah,
So I had to work on myself. And so with the trust, I mean, that it took me a lot to get there. But again,
yes,
it started with me in working me on my healing
right,
totally. Because if
right.
we're not totally healed, how can we trust somebody else?
Absolutely. That's right. That's so
That's how
good.
I dealt with it.
Those are those triggers that you were talking about, and it's so important that we are conscious of ourselves, and that's what I've always had to work, not really work hard because I'm in tune with myself, but
Mhm.
what I had to work hard, exactly what you were talking about, Avis, from a mental health standpoint. I had to work hard in me being in relationships, those failed relationships. I needed that time alone because it was like going from relationship to relationship, and you're, like you said, you have those false expectations of
Right,
others where they cannot fulfill those needs. You have to be healed from what those traumatic experiences that you've gone through.
right.
Absolutely. And it's so wonderful, when God sends you a mate like, I have now as well, but that understands, and it doesn't mean that there's not things that may come up sometimes,
Right.
and you have to work through that. You really do. Let me see if there's any more questions. Thank you. You're right. Okay. All right. So I want to also ask you, did you ever, okay, you answered that you did go back several times. So you
Several
did
times.
try to get out, and
Hmm.
then you didn't succeed right away. So you were kind of going back. Did you I think you mentioned that you kept it a secret.
I did. I
How is
did.
the secrecy from a mental health standpoint?
It festers.
Hmm.
It festers and it manifests itself as far as how you interact with other people.
Right. Right.
Um, yeah. And I suffered in silence.
Wow. Wow.
I suffered in silence.
Whew, you've definitely been through a lot. What hold do you feel he had on you? Do you think it was like just like self-esteem? Do you think that it was the daddy, it was the self-esteem, it was a combination of things? Or do you feel that your self-esteem was diminished because of the domestic violence?
Yeah, everything that you said. And
Okay.
then I want to add to that was fear.
Okay.
Because it was, if I can't have you, can't nobody else have you.
Right.
Um
Yes.
if there was a time where, because with that it came to stalking.
Mm-hmm.
There was a time I had a job at Publix and he would come and stand next to my register to see what men would come through my line, and things like that. And then when I was trying to get away, if I was seen talking to someone of the opposite sex, there was an issue. I got to the point where it was just out in the open, the physical interaction with
Yes.
us, between us. It was humiliating, you know.
Right. Right.
And so it was very hard for me, because now I feel like I'm the laughing stock. Everybody knows, or the whispers, or you know what I mean. So I had to go through all of that, and then there were threats. If you don't come back, then I'm going to shoot your family up. I'm gonna shoot your.
Wow.
I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna do that. I had to go through all of that, and so fear towards the
Mhm.
end was my way of reasoning to go back, because now you kind of holding my family hostage if I don't go. You know what I mean? And I,
Yes.
not figuratively, you know, I need to go back because I don't
Right.
want my family to be harmed. But that's just what it was.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm sure there's so many people out there that can relate. I want to pause for a minute and I want to bring Dr. J.R. Thicklin in the room. Dr. J.R. Thicklin, who I say is the expert in this area, and you'll see why. If you could just introduce yourself and tell us about your organization. And I just want to ask this question once you tell us, does this sound familiar?
Well, good evening, first of all, and thank you for having me on. I tell you, this has been great. Listen, this sounds very familiar. Dr. Avis is really laying herself bare and transparent, and it's so important because there are people that are relating to her right now. These stories are true. This is not reality TV, folks. This is real life of things people have experienced. So it is true. But I want to say, uh, uh, Dr. Jared Thicklin, I am the founder and CEO of Destiny by Choice, where we're empowering lives, shaping destinies of those impacted by domestic violence, fatherlessness, and other social determinants. And Destiny by Choice actually been around over 24 years, and it became the faith-based arm of my church that I founded out in the Glades area back in 1997. However, inside of that journey, I will say this to you. I was introduced to domestic violence when I began to understand that this was part of God calling me into this type work. I want you to hear the irony of it. And although I've known Dr. Avis for a while, I never drew this connection to right now.
Right.
August 10th, 1984. I was a young man, 13 days from turning 20 years old, starting to work at St. Mary's Hospital. I was working and going to school at the same time. And when I got there, I met a few people that was put in charge of orientation. One of the young ladies' name was Avis.
Wow.
That was her name. I met Avis on August 10th.
Mm-hmm.
That was a Thursday. She did my orientation on that Thursday. She did my orientation on that Friday. And when she left, because she came in earlier than I did, so she left earlier. And I remember her and some of the other young ladies talking about the weekend that they were going to have. And they were going to turn up. They were going to be great. And I said, be safe. I'll see you guys next week. Well, folks, I never got a chance to see Avis next week. Because on that Monday morning, Avis and her aunt was both murdered by her estranged lover.
Wow.
And little did I know that little did I know that was God's portal way into me really getting involved in domestic violence. Mm-hmm. In the 11 years that I worked at St. Mary's, I lost 3 coworkers, all Black women, to domestic violence.
Wow.
And it struck me in a different way. So it wasn't just preaching the gospel, but it was saying that there's more to it than just Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, but how these things apply to people's everyday lives. How do these things impact people's things? You can have a great hallelujah, but you can have a hellified life. And if you don't get instructions on what to do, church can become a place of, I like to call it, we all have a lot of catharsis experiences at church, right? We go through that experience, but we don't really get delivered because we haven't got what we need. And truly, our people do perish for a lack of knowledge. And what I realized was this, that it didn't matter how great you was hermeneutically. It did not make, you could yell, scream, and squall, but when people are not receiving life and things that will change their life, listen, you're just making a lot of noise. And so for me, it became a whole different path inside of addressing domestic violence. And I literally, if you go back to 1984, if I'm being honest, my involvement with domestic violence started 40 years ago.
Wow.
40 years ago. I became immersed in domestic violence over 30-something years ago. And the rest is history in terms of what we do. And there's so much more need to be done, particularly in the faith community and within particular communities of color.
That is so, so good. I absolutely love what you said about church. I mean, most people, I'm an open book, and most people know, a lot of people know my story. And one thing that most people know is I was raised in the church. I was raised under the pews. And it is so important that we meet the needs of people right where they are, because so many times, like you say, we're jumping and shouting. From your standpoint, it's, preaching. And I can relate to that as well, preaching and, doing all of that. But whose life was impacted? When they left the church, were their lives impacted? Did they feel like I can open up and talk to the pastor or talk to the missionary or talk to somebody? I want to go to therapy now. I like the fact that, number one, that God used you. And it's so unique, the way that God used you, because many people are selfish. And like you said, it wasn't you in particular that was going through the domestic violence, but it was people around you. So I really applaud you, Dr. Thicklin, for just being so unselfish and obedient, to God and what you've done and continue to do. I want to ask you a question. Are there any trends that you may have noticed as a result to demographics of those who are victims of domestic violence?
That's a real good question. And definitely there are trends that are there. We are seeing, and especially if, believe it or not, since COVID, we have seen even a greater uptick of domestic violence that is happening. And now domestic violence tends to happen even more so. You'll find domestic violence happening a lot more in a lot of rural areas because of lack of resources, but also in big metropolitan cities as well. And unfortunately, I have to say, demographically, women of color suffer domestic violence disproportionately at a greater rate than their non-Black counterparts. So when you consider this fact here with our women of color deal with it. Say, for instance, I think that the latest statistics, about 40% of Black women are affected at some point or another by domestic violence, where white women are affected somewhat 30% inside of those time.
Wow.
And that concerns me for this reason. It concerns me as a person who considers himself a little bit of a historian, and I love our history, but I also understand the fact that particularly Black women have carried so much weight, so much burden. Black women was the last to be liberated. They were the last, and they've gone through. And sometimes I get upset because I think that even when we receive our liberation, if you would, I think that somewhere or another that us as a Black men really forgot about our sisters in the sense of where we should have been able to help lift them up. We should have. Black women have always been double minority. They were a minority because they was women, and they was a minority because they were Black.
That's right.
But there's no group of women that have ever stood by their men more strongly than a Black woman.
That's
no
right.
one. And so it kind of bothers me in this season when I'm hearing brothers having all these crazy conversations about a Black woman, when the reality is, let's put it where it is. Black women have overcome things. They have overcome in spite of, and they will still love us, even in the midst of the stuff we put them through. And that's why I can relate to Dr. Avis when she talks about, like most victims, regardless of cover, the average victim returned back to their perpetrator 7 times. There's an element of forgiveness. I want to believe that they've changed. Sometimes it's fear. I can't live without them. It may seem crazy, but people can love people that's hurting them, because the fact that's what the initial job of love, that it covers a multitude of faults. The initial function of love, that it tends to look over things, and that's what we call grace. But in the midst of it, we learn through wisdom, and we learn through wisdom that, listen, this isn't the will of God for my life, that I remain here to be abused and battered. And when others are trying to, and that's where I understand I have a mission to the clergy for this reason here, because the fact we are responsible for what we say to people of that pulpit. And see, I don't have time to be a showman. I don't have time to be a clown. I don't have time to this is not showtime at the Apollo. The words that we speak, they are spirit and they are life. And if we waste those precious moments without giving people who's sitting in that audience what they need. And that's what's important. I name it, claim it, blab it, grab it, say it, have it, but that doesn't do anything for a person who listened. Their only relief was going to church, because that got them away from the perpetrator for a couple of hours. But what about it when they return home? What can we give them, pastors, when they come to us? Do we know what to do? Do we give them real sound advice? Or are we so wrapped in our religiosity that literally we tell them to pray and stay? And we oftentimes guilt trip them, and they now feel that they're compelled to stay, because we'll say, well, you said to death do us part. Well, let me say something to you. That is not what to death do us part mean. God didn't call you to die at the hand of your perpetrator, of your husband, or whoever it may be. So there's a lot of work to do inside of the field, and we just got to be willing to be educated, because I know as a clergy, and I celebrated 40 years of public ministry back in August, and I think about thank you, inside of my time, we all use the scripture in Hosea 4:6, for my people perish for lack of knowledge. And always when I'm doing these workshops with leaders and things, I'd say, take a deeper look, because you spoke the truth. The people that God entrusted to you are perishing because of our lack of knowledge, our lack of getting more training, getting the things that we need, that we can really be there for our people. And I believe this, and I understand, Pastor said, well, we got enough on our plate, and we do. But I do believe this. God never called for us to do it all. And that's the reason why he sent people into the ministry like the Lisas, like the Dr. Chapman. Why does he send them there? Because he's equipped them with what they need and what they have
Yes.
to be able to serve. But we put so much focus on the other part of ministry that we don't understand that there are people there that are suffering in silence.
That's
They're
right.
suffering in silence. They're smiling, but they're crying. And those
Yes.
have to address.
Yes, that is so good. You actually answered one of my questions. One of my questions to you was going to be, first I was going to ask, about the counseling, just give, an example of, did you have like an Avis? How do you counsel, someone, a lady or a man? Because men go through domestic
Exactly.
violence as
One and
well.
nine. Mm-hmm.
Right. So how do you counsel? And then my follow-up question was going to be a marriage. What about a marriage relationship? How do you counsel a woman or a man that's going through domestic violence in a regular relationship and then in a marital relationship?
And I answer both of those because the Avises of the world come through. And I often tell pastors this, they come. A lot of time when I do training and workshops, it could be in the secular world, but they'll be in the audience and they'll come to me and say, man, that was real good. He said, but I don't have that problem in my church. And I always give them that look like, sure, you do. And the only reason that you think that you don't have that problem in your church, because you have never spoken about it, you've never preached about it. So therefore, guess what? You never given your parishioners an opportunity to know that it's safe to even talk about it. So how do you know it? You have to create a safe place for people to be able to express what they're going through without judgment, without saying, even when that judgment comes from a pure place. For instance, people say things like this, girl, you too pretty be beaten on, let somebody beat on you like that. Girl, you too smart. The domestic violence has nothing to do with how cute you are, how smart you are, how pretty you are, none of those things. So we have to be willing to listen, number one. Number two, we must create a safe space for that person to be able to speak and listen to them without judgment.
Right.
Thirdly, here's the thing I often say. If we don't know what to do, be willing to get help to assist in that matter. Of course, with the permission of the person that is there. But I always say that I do believe that the church is called to be the spiritual trauma center. I believe that the church is called to be the trauma center. People ought to be able to come there just as they are. They should be able to come there and fall apart, literally fall apart. Just let it all hang out.
Yes.
But we don't do that because of the fact we're too busy in the church being concerned about the costume party. Do we look the right way? Is this right? And why is it that we will associate a victim being abused as if they did something wrong and never associate the fact that what is the problem here with the perpetrator? And when we don't do this, we cause people to wear the mask. They're never forthcoming. So how do we deal with these individuals? I believe we have to become equipped. We have to become equipped. And why is that important? Because as I said, we're called to be the trauma center. And I know, listen, he didn't say that we had to be the trauma surgeon, but we got to at least be a good triage nurse.
Right. That's real good because he's a surgeon.
And we ought to know the resources in the community so that we can refer out there to get the help that we may not be able to give them in and of our own selves. So that's what we say to the Avises of this world. The other part becomes a little bit more difficult, but very plain at the same time. In church, when you're dealing with people that's in the church, say people of the faith, they're in a marriage. It is so important that as pastors that we don't go in literally looking at the wrong thing first. And what do I mean the wrong thing first? We'll say, listen, well, God called y'all to be together and through all. I've got to listen to what is going on in the marriage. First of all, I say this, very seldom have I ever had couples to come together to me and said, we're having a domestic violence issue. Most of the time, it is the victim that does so. And then the best practice is that we don't recommend couple counseling when it comes to domestic violence. If that victim, who may be a parishioner in your church, if they self-disclose, you need to listen to them. You need to hear them out, number one. Number two, you need to make sure that they're safe and what you're going to provide for them. Thirdly, this may sound a little odd. You don't just go and talk to the partner because you know them. you must get their permission to do so. Because though you may be of well intent, your well intentions without being advised really by the victim could put them in even a greater danger. And that's why you just don't do so. And we've seen pastors do this. I've seen deacons get beat up because they showed up at the person's house. No, you got to use wisdom inside of that. So the thing I really wanted to say to you was this. We have a responsibility that when we talk to victims of domestic violence in the church, we're not here. Listen, we're not here to break them up, but we're not here to sentence them to a life of abuse neither. So we need to give them scripture and let them know, first of all, they're not suffering for Christ's sake. Let's get that out of their mind. Second of all, we need to relieve them of the guilt that the enemy is already using against them to make them think this. The reason this is happening because this is some type of retribution for something you did years ago. Not at all.
Wow, that's good.
Comfort them that listen, that God is love. And let me tell you something. Everything about God is love. Everything about God is love. And that's what we have to talk about, the love of God. And we must minister to them right. And so that's how you deal with it inside of a marriage. But it's so much more than that. And I have some in one of the books.
It's such a deep, it is really, really a deep topic. And I know we could go on and on. We do have some questions in the chat. There's a question that's there that says, is there a trend with ministers and pastors in terms of being the violators?
Yeah, it is. I'm going to answer that as I plug my battery back in before it dies.
Okay, no problem.
When you talk about a trend, it's hard to say there's a trend, but there is a consensus in a knowing that, listen, unfortunately, there are many pastors, clergy, deacons that are abusive. Let's just put it where it is. We're not going to placate that. It's one of the things that I talk about. I'm not very popular in this thing because I'm going to speak the truth. At the end of the day, what you're going to do, okay? All right, I ain't scared of you. But anyway, at the end of the day, because domestic violence is really about power and control. Watch what I'm saying. Power and control.
Yes.
There are certain pastors or certain men that their ideal of power is authority in the way that they are abusive. You do what I say and you do as I say and you do it now. So the problem is that we find a lot of high profile position people with power that are very abusive. They are very abusive. Unfortunately, I have been part of cases. I have been part of trainings where I use, unfortunately, of clergies that have not only murdered their wives, but have been abusive inside of that. And it's very sad at times because, unfortunately, the church has become very image driven. And when I say image driven, oftentimes a victim will stay in an abusive relationship, very much like you heard Dr. Avis say, because, listen, they don't want to ruin the reputation of, they don't want people to think badly of, they don't want to do so. So oftentimes victims will they will bite the bullet, if you would, suffering, trying to protect, once again, the perpetrator.
That's good. That's good. Do you need to plug your computer in?
I'm going to plug it up right now.
Okay, because I definitely don't want to lose you. Dr. Chapman, are you there? We're going to bring Dr. Chapman-Reese. I'm so sorry. We're going to bring Dr. Avis. I think I'll be safe if I say Dr. Avis. I'm not good with those hyphenated names. And me and Dr. Avis go back so many years from like kids. So like family. Yes.
One thing I wanted to say was that the community needs to change their mindset and not so much say or think that it's not in my house or it's not, close to home, so I'm not going to get involved.
Right.
Because you have a lot of people that, I don't want to get involved. You know what I mean? I had a student that was dealing with that just 2 weeks ago, and she pretty much was like, I don't have anywhere else to go, and one of her teachers were like, I don't want to touch that. I don't want to get involved. I said, domestic violence is everybody's business.
Right.
Absolutely.
It's everybody's business.
I love it. I actually have a page on Facebook called Domestic Violence is Everybody's Business.
Everybody's business.
That's good. That's really
exactly
good.
right.
Dr. Thicklin, can you tell us about Destiny by Choice? Like what does your organization do for victims of domestic violence?
That's a good question because that role has evolved over the years. In the very early years, we definitely provided direct counseling to them. We provided a connection to resources in the community, and we still do that part there. We provided counseling to them. We did those things there. As we've evolved over the years, we become more or less, if you would, education, training, specifically culturally specific training about domestic violence in the African American community, in the African diaspora as a whole, as well as dealing with faith and mental health. So once again, we're providing trainings, we're providing those things such as that. Destiny by Choice, and mainly myself, have been affiliated with Palm Beach County Sexual Assault Response Team for a number of years. About less than 9 years ago, we collaborated with them, and we wrote the clergy handbook on domestic, and the clergy toolkit on domestic and sexual violence. And so we did that in conjunction with them through a grant that they had, and they were able to support us in doing that work. And so that's part of what we've done. The other thing that we have done outside of Destiny by Choice, but still through our hands, is that we collaborated, God, I can't believe it, back in 2010 with the Institute on Domestic Violence in the African American Community, at that time out of the University of Minnesota. And we co-wrote here a whole training manual that had a companion DVD. Look how long ago that seemed. And it's called, you won't be able to see it here, but it's called Speaking of Faith, Domestic Violence Programs in the African American Church. And that was used in a lot of colleges, university that was doing work dealing with faith and domestic violence, particularly inside of it. So one of the things that we continue to do those things. We do have a component of what we do as far as HIV and PrEP, and definitely continue to provide that type of information, education, and trainings. And we want to do more trainings, but you'll be amazed what happens when you try to talk to the people in the church. They run from it like
right.
raid.
Right.
Can I ask a question, Dr. Thicklin? What do you have in place for the children in the home?
Okay. So one of the things I have in place for the children at home now is that I do refer a lot. I refer out to people that I now consider trusted colleagues who understand the dynamics, both from a academic or clinical standpoint, but also from, if you would, a cultural perspective. And I think that's so very important, because domestic violence is not necessarily a one-size-fits-all. It just simply isn't. It isn't. People oftentimes look at Black women and say, why Black women stay? Because Black women have this fear. Here's a fear. I don't want him to go to jail. I just simply want the abuse to stop.
Right.
I don't want him to end up getting a record and lose his job and can't watch. He's concerned about all of those things. So guess what? She'll go through all those limbs. Where another person who have a bunch of other resources and things like that, they don't care, because they know that they're going to be all right. But we culturally understand that the domino effect of what happens with domestic violence. So with children, one of the things I do now is refer more than I ever referred before. But I will say to you, one of the earliest part of what I did started with children. Matter of fact, in the schools, going through all the high schools and things, my first major award I ever received was from the governor for educating children in domestic and dating violence. And so those things made a difference then, and they will make a difference now. But I caution, I say to everyone that we have to really get involved with this, because if we don't get involved, and you said something that was so important earlier, Dr. Avis, is that it is everybody's business, but we have to get involved. I want to see more men involved. I want to see more churches involved. That's why I can applaud Oasis.
Yes. Thank you, Lord. Thank you for my pastor.
For being trailblazers who understand the fact that when you're talking about ministering to the world, it's not just about, let's turn to the book of Luke. Yes, all that's inclusive in what we do inside of it, but we got to be willing to step out of the norm, step out of the four walls, and reach people where they are, because I believe that we're called to do it. We are called to do it, because the most plenteous resource in any community is the church. Think about
Yes,
it.
right. That's right.
You have
I
more
so
churches than you
love
have
that.
schools.
Mm-hmm.
You have more
Mm-hmm.
churches than you have hospitals. You have
Right,
more
right,
churches than you have police departments. You have more
right.
churches than any of those things. And we
Yes.
miss out on such a powerful opportunity. Consider this. Children go to school, parents go to work, but the family come to church. It's the only place that have the opportunity to capture the whole family.
Yes, that's right. That's good.
The reason why,
Avis, you asked one of the questions I actually had on here about what advice would you give, and I have some questions for you, Avis, too, as we're wrapping it up. I know we've been on here over an hour, but it's so good. I wanted one of the questions for Dr. Thicklin is what advice would you give to family, friends, and Dr. Avis kind of hit on this, how people say that they don't want to get involved. And I'm going to give you a real life situation where I was living in an apartment and I heard a lot of domestic violence going on. And I too felt like, oh my goodness, it was, during a time where people were just killing people. It's like these days you're afraid to even stand up and say something because a lot of times the police officer is knocking on your door. They come out and you're telling them where it's going on at, but then your door is the one to get knocked on and you're trying to be discreet about it. But I could not sit there and listen to this woman screaming and listening. And they were above me. So I would hear the dragging on the floor. I would hear the knocking on the walls. And I had to call the cops. So what advice would you give? I have that question for you. And then I would kind of want to circle back around just to bring some clarity too about children. But if you can answer that question for me.
Well, let me say this. First of all, you have every right, as if everybody does, to be somewhat cautious in these days about how do you intervene in domestic violence situation. Right. It's a very complex situation, even for family members and loved ones to get involved with it. Because first of all, domestic violence disrupts the whole family norm. It disrupts everything. So one of the things I say to people is this, because in my early days, I would be that person that just intervened, bold until I got some sense. And what I understood was that that little thing called 911 is very valuable. Mm-hmm. It's very valuable to a certain sense. I tell people that it's not always wise to just immediately barge in and emerge. It's a situation by situation type thing. Absolutely. So one of the things I do, I am quick finger with 911. It's there inside of it. I have sat in Wendy's parking lot and watched people in an altercation there. I'm on the phone 911. I'm calling them. I'm describing to them the vehicle. He's wearing a blue shirt and these type thing there, and watch the police come and do what they need to do. In other situations, there are situations I know that I personally have intervened when I saw a real imminent danger going on. And as a man, and oftentimes if I have another man, there's a way that I can talk. I just actually dispute something about a month ago. When I saw the guy hitting him, I said, hey, my brother, we don't do that around here. He said, what are you talking about? No, we don't do that around here. We men, we don't do that around here. Right. And I think it more startled him more than anything. But I wasn't backing down. Now, I can't tell you what I would have done if he had pulled out anything. If feet don't fail me now. But right. What I'm saying is that the worst thing you can do is nothing.
Right. Exactly.
The best thing that you can do is at least intervene, at least in one way, whether it's calling 911 or if you have an opportunity to be able to speak to that survivor later. But on the other flip side, I like to talk to men and say, bro, how do we hold our friends accountable? Because these dudes that are doing this, they're friends to somebody. They brothers to somebody. If we all that cool, man, I can't say that, hey, man, so man, why you get that way, man?
Right.
How you got that way, because I think that we have to hold each other accountable. Yeah. So, I will say this, the worst thing that you can do is be silent.
That's right.
One of the easiest things you can do is 911. Right. The other part there is be there for people. And when I say being a listening ear, you're not going to solve it all at once. It never is solved all at once. And so don't expect it to be solved all at once. And the other part is this, be ready to be very long suffering. Why? Because victims don't automatically leave. And that's why people get discouraged. I've seen it. Family members, well, I let her came and stayed with me 3 times. She'd have left it. No, she must love it. So I'm done with it. And we get tired. And I understand that. But as tired as you are as a family member, believe it or not, that victim is not only tired, they're confused, they're hurt, they feel trapped. And you may be that only lifeline. So pray for patience inside of that. Find ways to be able to uplift them. And that's what
Yes. Okay, thank you so much for that. And we have a statement in the chat that said I was in a verbal abuse marriage and it's just as bad as physical abuse. So I made myself strong and left. Some people thought I should stay and try to work it out, but I tried and it didn't work out. Went to marriage counseling, trying to make it work, but it didn't. My ex-husband blamed me for everything. I think that's so good because I've been there, and also I've been there, and verbal abuse, I have to say sometimes it can be just as bad or even worse, because like Dr. Avis was saying, now physical, of course, there's like bones and that can be broken, there's a lot with physical abuse, as well. But verbal abuse, that mind is where that battlefield is. And to be called out your name, the bees and the whores and all this, what we don't deserve, it's a terrible thing, and that bothers your self-esteem as well. So I have to agree with you, sister, and kudos for you for getting out of that, because you don't have to deal with that either. I kind of want to go back to the children, and then I want to talk about the abuser for a minute from a faith standpoint and mental health. The children. Now, Dr. Avis asked the question about the children, and thank you so much for giving us the insight on providing that awareness, getting resources for the children as well. But in terms of how does that impact the children in the home? Like letting them know, like as teenagers, this can happen, and not look for the warning signs. But those children in that home that is seeing mommy being hit upside the head, and or seeing daddy being, hit upside the head, those children are affected. So what type of advice, what can we do for the children?
So basically, we have to have conversations with our youth, number one. So that's a multifaceted question, because as an educator, especially when I was with the public school system, you see children, they act out. They act out, right? And then also, the sad part is domestic violence is happening younger and younger and younger. And so I talk to young ladies all of the time, is young as middle school or high school. My boyfriend told me I need to answer the phone. I need to be home. First of all, your boyfriend don't pay no bills.
Come on.
You and your parents, you know what I mean? And so they think that because the spouse, not spouse, but the person that they're in a relationship with is placing all these restrictions and these expectations, that equates to love, that's commensurate to love, and it's not. It's not. So we do have to have these conversations. I would charge any organization that have any youth programs under the auspice of that organization, have these kinds of conversations with the youth, especially for young men and young women, because it happens to men too. You have a lot of women that emasculate men.
Yes.
They provoke men.
Yes.
So it's not just, victims are not just women.
Right.
So you gotta have, and I'm speaking for the youth, have these conversations with the youth, especially those who are going off to the military, those who are going away, to school, because they're not with their parents, and they need to be told as well. Because remember, at the very beginning, I don't have an older sibling to kind of put me on game. You know what I mean? So I didn't know what those red flags were. And I've been getting them from day one and didn't even know it. So we
Right.
have to talk to our children, and then too, for the couples who have these arguments in front of the children, we got to be careful of what we say and what we do in front of children, because again, they emulate what they see, and
That's
then
right.
too, they carry all of that stress to school.
Right.
Exactly.
They're being just like, Pastor Fu would say, they're being traumatized. They act out, and that can manifest itself in so many ways: grades, their behavior, things like that. And then too, and that's a whole nother conversation. We got all these specialists in these school systems. They are so quick to label our little brown boys and brown girls
That's
and
right.
say that they have some type of disability because they're acting out.
Right.
Yeah.
For them to go that route. That's a scapegoat. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
we just have, like you said, Dr. Thicklin, it is a domino effect, because it not only affects that person who is being directly abused, but it also impacts the families. It
Yes.
impacts the friends. It impacts, lay persons in the community. It impacts everybody. I had a friend who was just shy of her 40th birthday. Her ex-husband killed her and turned around and killed himself.
Yeah.
Horrible. It's
It
horrible.
does.
So I knew someone else. She got away from her abuser, went to her parents' house. He came to the parents' house and shot everybody in the house.
Wow.
They're gone.
Wow. Yeah.
So again, domestic violence is everybody's business.
Yeah, and you put that
Absolutely.
so well, and you gave a great example of that, and it goes back to
Mhm.
what you're saying. This thing is cyclical. Understand, it's a cycle of abuse. It is also
Yes.
a generational cycle. Consider the fact. Now, you've been an educator in the school. Think about this: a kid that is exposed to domestic violence. First of all, they are experiencing trauma. They're getting mixed messages inside of it. The
Right.
only thing they know, they're looking to these trusted adults to be the example. And in either way it goes, what research says that children that are exposed to domestic violence growing up, they're more likely either to become abusers or they become victims themselves of
Absolutely.
That's
abuse.
good.
And so one of the things that happened inside of that is this, is that Dorothy Law Note, back in the 70s, she was a psychologist. She wrote this piece called Children Learn What They Live. If they live with hostility, they learn to fight. If they live with these things, and that was these effect that happened. Here's a problem that we have to understand very early on, and maybe this will help families recognize, how can I help my family member on the ground level?
Right.
We will find out in little children, especially little boys. Watch what I'm about to say. Little boys oftentimes will grow up. And in the beginning, if they see that man, their dad, or whoever that man is, being abusive to their mom, at maybe 6 or 7 years old, they're scared. And maybe they say, leave my mom alone, go run to the closet or whatever. But they get a little older and these things happening. And what do? Now they put themselves in harm's way.
Right.
They stand in between and leave my mom alone. And then they become teenagers. And I can recall cases right here in Palm Beach County, so many years ago, 17-year-old shot and killed her mother's boyfriend. Why? Because he started to constantly do these things. Now,
That's
we
right.
see those things happening, but look for the signs where kids are being traumatized. Oftentimes, young kids begin to regress in their behavior. Many of them go back to bedwetting, although they're 8 and 9 years old, because
Absolutely.
what they're experiencing. It is played out in the classroom. Think about it.
Yes.
Teachers, that's why I think, look, teachers should be the highest paid people in the country. Why? Because we live in a day and time that they're expected to be the educator, the psychologist, the social worker, and all those things.
And parents.
And parents. Consider this class. Oftentimes, we don't know what those kids have experienced overnight.
That's
One
right.
of the things that our kids went through test anxiety, and remember we was going through the standardized testing, and I mean, kids became scared of the FCAT. Who's the FCAT, right? And we wanted them to achieve on a certain level, not knowing the fact that that kid may have spent the whole night in the closet, just trying to hide away from domestic violence. Coming to school the next morning, tired, anxiety, and we actually expect you to achieve high on the test. The problem is you got teachers that also with anxiety from dealing with everything. So what does she see little Johnny doing? And Johnny's acting out. Look, I'm going to send you down to the office. We send him down to the office, put in school suspension. He just simply got re-victimized over and over again because no one heard the silent cry of what's going on.
And the caveat to that is look at these
Yeah.
school shootings.
Yes,
Look at
that's
these school
right.
shootings.
Mm-hmm.
And why some of these children are acting out.
Absolutely.
That's
Over
right.
and over
It's a
again.
cycle.
It's a cycle.
So it's a
It's
cycle.
so
So it's
true.
not isolated. It is everybody's business. And this last point is very important. Even if you don't know the kids,
That's right.
your kids know the kids. Because
Right.
that kid sat in the same classroom as your kid. That kid does. And so now this kid ends up, whether this kid is killed or this kid is exposed to domestic violence or these things are happening, those kids are impacted by it.
Right.
And that's
Right.
why it's a community.
Mhm.
It's a community responsibility.
Right.
It is the church's responsibility. It is, listen, we've got to do a better job. We've got to, because there are things that directly impact our children and generationally. I'm going to say something to you. You can't make enough money to get out of it.
That's right.
Mindset. This is
That's
behavior.
good. Yes.
Will get a lot of money and a lot of fame, and it only gives them this false sense of more power to do the things that they do, including abuse, violence, human trafficking, sex trafficking, and you name it all.
Yes.
All of it stems from that same place, and therefore we have a responsibility.
Yes.
And that's why I believe it's so important. Oasis in its own name means a place of refreshing, means a place of
yes, yes.
and I think it's an hour that the church must become a place of refreshing and restoration, because people are labored and they're tired. We're tired of your tired sermon. They done heard Daniel and the lion den 100 times, but they're in their own den, and we've got to be able to give them a practical, relevant word. And even if not, at least be willing to say, listen, we're going to have a ministry set aside to be able to help and do these things that are going to help the community. At the end of the day, let me say it like I feel it. Pastor, folks ain't come to see you entertain.
That's right.
Their lives are on the line.
Yes.
Their families are on the line. Their generations are on the line. So we have to make provision
Absolutely.
to be that place when they
Absolutely.
come. And I just want to close by saying this. The real first domestic violence shelter, you know what it was really started by? It wasn't called a shelter, but it was started by the women in the church. The woman in the church who got a hold of the fact that a sister was being abused and she was scared for her life. And those women there began to take that family into their home. They began to provide things like blankets and things for these people to get by with. Where is that spirit?
That's right. That's right. If we can just get back to right there. Our pastor was, talking about that. We were talking about evangelism yesterday. We celebrated our pastor for Pastor's Appreciation. And we were talking about, helping the poor, helping the widow, helping the children. We just did like the homeless, giving out blankets, cover me, and that's something we do every year. People need help. Like you say, the Oasis, I absolutely love my church, and I know there's a lot of other churches out there, no disrespect, but I love the fact that our pastor teaches us, equips us to go out in the community. It is not about the four walls. It's there, like you said, we're the hospital. We're there to get fueled up. We're there to help. We're there to train and equip so we can go out there and get and help the lost and the broken. There are so many people that are broken. And I thought about, as we were talking, I thought about the abuser. And I'm like, the thing about it is that we focus on the victim, and absolutely we should, because we've all been victims of something, but that abuser needs help. So it's like, what do we do for that abuser? Where, and I know, they have to get to the point where, they want help. And many times, they don't want help. But I think as a body of Christ, we need to even continue to pray that those abusers get healed. Because you said it, Dr. Thicklin, earlier. I think Dr. Avis said it, in her situation, this young man was like a victim of a cycle as well. So we deal with these generational cycles, and someone has to be the bloodline breaker, and help and stop it in the family. Because if not, it's going to continue. That's where that suicide, like you said, what's happening in the schools, it's crazy because it falls back to mental health. And that's what the passion is. And I want to say thank you so much again to my pastor, because we started this mental health program back in 2017. And my pastor knows it all too well. And it started with her and I, because of the things that I've gone through, the trauma that I've gone through, and being diagnosed with bipolar disorder. And I thank God for having a pastor that was open to it and allows us to have these forums.
Absolutely.
She has a heart for it, you know, a passion for it. And she had a heart to help me. She didn't leave me, you know, in the condition that I was in, you know, and we could have lost our relationship. But what happened, you have to care, like Dr. Avis said, I think you said it's on your pages as well. It's everybody's business. She did research on bipolar disorder so she can understand me and help me, you know. So I have to also thank NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Illness.
I love NAMI.
Yes, they've been, you know, a huge resource. And, you know, that's another place where you can go. Dr. Thicklin, I'm sure you have some information. I know you put some out there. What about, is it aid for victims of domestic violence?
Aid to victims of domestic abuse, ABDA, they're affectionately known. ABDA, their numbers should still be 1-800-355-8547. And that's coming off the top of my head. I worked for ABDA many years ago in the early 90s. I worked for them, and they're an excellent organization. They're one of the 2 certified domestic violence centers in Palm Beach County, along with the YWCA Harmony House. Those are our 2 certified domestic violence agencies, but there are many other agencies. You got victim services, you got even legal aid. You even have Home Safe has a division that deals with domestic violence. And there's a lot of things that are there. And to your point, that is so true. Yeah, abusers need help. And it's interesting, for the last 25 years, I started really also working with abusers. And so we started off doing what we call the regular batterers intervention. And what I recognized easily was the fact it's not one of those things that you can just say it's a cookie cutter, because people come from different walks of life. And so over the period of time, we understood I had to get into what I call a really faith-based spiritual model. How do we change these guys' behaviors? How do we do so? How do we get to the core of how they're thinking? Now, I've been around a long time. I've seen the domestic violence movement evolve slowly. And years ago, they would not want you to even think about a perpetrator as having been grown up that way. And no, they said, don't pathologize him. But the reality is this: that same little boy that I would see at that shelter, when I worked for aid to victim of domestic assault at that time, they're chasing that domestic abuse. That same little boy who was 6, 7, and 8 years old at that time, folks, he grew up. They grew up. And without the proper intervention, they could end up being that perpetrator later on in life. And so the thing about it is that we have to acknowledge where they come from. We must begin to deal with them, and we have to model what I call healthy manhood. Healthy manhood of who we are. And so one of the things I understood is that faith does play a great part. So back in 2020, I believe it was, we actually wrote a piece for the state of Connecticut. We actually sold it to them for their curriculum up there. And they wanted a faith-based piece for their batterers intervention program for the state of Connecticut. We wrote a whole section that was called Faith That Transforms. And that came from my work with perpetrators inside of the prisons, places like Sago Palm, places like Everglades Correctional, deep down in Miami, and watching those men's lives be transformed. Listen, I didn't preach necessarily to them. I modeled to them. I, for example, we was able to invade their yesterday, if you would, in order to bring them up to understand what had they seen, what hadn't they seen. And let me say, is it possible? Yes. Can it happen? Yes. Do they need to have to want it? Yes. But here's the thing about it. You say what I've said for years. There's 2 wings on a bird. We spent the most of our time in this movement dealing with victims, as we should. But I always say a bird cannot fly with one wing.
That's
You
right.
got to get a situation, because if we don't get the perpetrators whole, guess what? They will just find a new victim.
That's
They'll
right.
end up a new victim.
Yes.
But I've seen men that I know that have gone through transformation experiences. And I've seen men, listen, that their former victim have testified, that's not the man that I was married to. He's good to Jessica, but he was a horror to me.
Right.
He had not been transformed when he was with her.
Right.
By the time Jessica got him, he was transformed. By the time she got him, he had been healed and had intervention inside of it. And what I'm saying is that we have to be very careful. We cannot excuse the behavior of our boys and of our men. We do a great job in preaching to our women and our girls, but when are we going to take charge? And we need to model and teach our boys and our men. Let's not give them high five when they're getting over on female. Let's not high five them when they're being conniving and sneaky and abusive.
That's right.
Correct that behavior. If we can correct that behavior and model, look, we don't do this. I love using that language. I use it with my own sons. No, we don't do that around here. That's not what we do. And we have to, and as a village of men, even in the church, we ought to be saying, we don't do this.
That's right.
We ought to be men against domestic violence. We ought to have a mad dad chapter for men against domestic violence. Absolutely. Right.
Come on, that's good. I want to say something to the parents and everyone that's listening. Then I would like you all to do your final closing by saying, what would you tell other ladies, Dr. Avis, that are survivors and that may be currently in a domestic violence relationship? And then Dr. Thicklin, what can we do better as a community, and what are your future goals? So I like to say, number one, based on experience with domestic violence myself, women, if a man is calling you out your name, if a man is hitting on you in front of your children, let him go. Let him go. Now, if it's a marital relationship, you need to seek God. You need to get the help you need. And I'm sure, God will lead you in terms of getting out of that relationship. That's not God's will for us. However, we're not here to tell a person, what to do with their marriage. But women, because like Dr. Thicklin, Dr. Avis just talked about during this session on tonight, our kids are watching. I'm telling you, I know from experience, our kids are watching. It is very hurting for their moms to be called out their names or hit on. And then again, men will grow up, they will do the same thing, or women will grow up and do the same thing, or they may feel like it's okay because it was okay with mama, or it was okay with daddy. So I'm going to do the same thing or take the same thing. Parents, stop arguing in front of the children. Stop fussing and fighting, whether you're on the phone with someone, whether you're cursing each other out, whether you're in a home. Stop it, because we are raising the next generation and they need to see model behavior. They need to see model behavior where it does not continue on for cycles and cycles and years and years. We got some kudos from a man today, and I so thank you, Dr. Thicklin. He gave kudos to the Black woman, to women. We're so strong, but we have to be smart as well. So that's my ending. And I would like to say thank you so much, Dr. Thicklin, Dr. Avis, if you would, Dr. Avis, if you would please go first. And thank you to my pastor, Cassandra Fuller. She is bubbling up everybody in the chat. She's been bubbling up. Go ahead, Dr. Avis.
So can you repeat my question again?
Okay, yes. So what would you tell ladies that are watching that are survivors of domestic violence in terms of, sharing with others? What would be your advice to them? And then those that are currently in domestic violence situations, just closing.
So to the survivors that are listening on social media, on YouTube, I would say, don't sit on your story. Don't sit on your story, because you never know who's around you. Because again, we wear masks. We wear masks very well, and there may be someone around you that's just waiting on to have a conversation, which would be a segue to share your story, to open up, because there are a lot of people who have been muted, who don't want to talk about it. They're embarrassed or whatever it is, but don't sit on your story, because you have no idea of the impact that you have. To women who are in some form of domestic violence, a situation, number one, love does not hurt. Know your worth. Because in order for you to expect someone or place an expectation to love you, you have to be able to love yourself and know who you are and whose you are. So if you are in that situation, again, domestic violence can be physical, it can be spiritual, emotional, financial, sexual, all of those things. If you feel that you are victim to any of those things, get out. Because if they do it one time, they'll do it again, and they'll keep doing it. Because what's going to happen is, I'm sorry, please don't leave me, I love you, I'll do anything, I'll go to counseling, I'll go to church, I'll do this, I'll do that. And so when you go back, and I'm not saying that people can't change, because they absolutely can change. But in the moment, they'll tell you what you want to hear.
That's right.
So even if you have children that are involved, your safety is so important. So get out, use those resources that Dr. Thicklin shared. Use your community resources, your churches, and to the community. Domestic violence is everybody's business. Stop turning a deaf ear and say, if it's not me or mine, I'm not getting involved. So that would be my little 2 cents.
I know. All right. Thank you so much. That was awesome. Awesome. And Dr. Thicklin, if you would please tell us what we can do better as a community, and what are your future goals in terms of Destiny by Choice?
Thank you so much. It's really been a pleasure being with you tonight. I'm just so blessed. I'm bubbling over, because I love the passion and the energy, and I love the forthrightness of the vision of doing these type things, especially coming from other faith leaders. I love it. This is my dream. As a community, what we can do better is this: we can be more open to talking about this. Let's make domestic violence a water cooler conversation. Let's talk about it, not from the point of victim blaming, but let's talk about the fact, well, this shouldn't be happening. This ought to not be happening. I think as a community, we can stop being territorial as far as the resources when it comes to the issue of domestic violence, and understanding the fact that because everyone is impacted, we need everybody to be a part of it. We need that. Now, as far as what I see as the future of Destiny by Choice, my dream is the fact that we totally reorganize on a whole nother level. We've been doing this a long time. So if I had my wish list, prayer list, I'm praying that I am in a position to get all of the technology, social media, television equipment, filmmaking equipment, because I think pictures is worth 1,000 words. And I believe that if we are able to create these type of visuals that people can see and see these things really played out, it will make a big difference inside of it. I will say to you this, that I see a future where we are engaging not only churches and really teaching them. And listen, I want to be able to do so where we ain't nobody got to be charged anything, but that's a real big prayer, right there. Call on a grant writer somewhere. But the other part of what I'm saying is this: I believe honestly that as a community, and as the future goes, is that we're going to really have to become our brothers and our sisters' keepers.
That's right.
I believe that. And what that means is this: we're not hating on anyone. We're going to have to understand we're going to need help somewhere, and we're going to have to accept help from somewhere. Right. And we have to come together, and we're going to have to do what's right. And I just want to say, I want to see us come together. I want to see the churches come together. I want to see more work out of our fraternities.
Yes.
See, until men start standing up and speaking out against domestic violence, till men start standing up and saying this is wrong. You're a daughter. You came from a mother. The only legal interest into this earthly realm is through a woman.
Yes.
What I say. The only legal entrance into this world is through a woman.
Good.
And so every man ought to be concerned about your daughter, your sister, your wife, your mother, your aunt. Be concerned enough that every victim you could see, hold up, I wouldn't want that to be my daughter. I wouldn't want that to be my sister. I wouldn't want that to be my niece. So let's man up, stand up against domestic violence.
Awesome. Oh my goodness. This has been one awesome night. I like to thank the viewers for being here and sticking with us. And I so hope that this has changed some lives and you have been provoked to take action. This is the first podcast that Oasis has done on domestic violence, but this certainly won't be the last. We will keep you posted. We're going to connect and continue the good work as it relates to all of these issues and mental health. Thank you again to my pastor, Senior Pastor Cassandra V. Fullwood. Thank you so much for allowing this to even be. And blessings to you all. Have a blessed night.
Absolutely.